Okay, so we're going to dive into a topic. We're just not going to like waste a minute because, you know, for all of us here, did your parents ever talk to you about the big R word at home, racism, while you were growing up? So there's a personal essay that was written on CBC, and this writer explores what it was like when parents are actually silent on big issues like racism and other things, and why the older generation perhaps sometimes chooses not to speak up about it and talk to kids like us about it. So let's dive in. Maybe if I can start with you, Chanel. Did you talk about things like racism at home with your parents?
You know what? We never talked about racism at home. And I think the article that you're talking about here is such a clear example of a hate crime, but that's not always what we experience, right? Like racism is so much more nuanced and complex than that. And sometimes it's like the way that someone looks at you or the way that they're talking to you, and you can just feel it in your bones. And I don't know how you would explain that to your parents. I never found the words to do that. And I think also, like, my parents were immigrants. They moved here from war-torn countries. They survived civil unrest. My parents moved here during the Gulf War from the Middle East. So I always felt guilty, like it would be a burden to them for me to tell them about my experiences with racism. And I think there is such a sentiment in immigrant families that, like, this is the price you pay to be a Canadian. It's just like part of the entry fee. And there's a comedian named Hassan Minhaj who talks about this in some of his stand-up about how his family experienced a lot of racism after 9/11 and how he was just so shocked that his parents didn't say anything. They didn't react. They didn't question. They didn't speak out. And his dad calls it the American dream tax. And like, sit with that for a moment, because that's saying to me that there are immigrant families that moved to Canada, that moved to America, and they feel like life here is so much better and so much safer that they're willing to accept racism.
Yeah. Hannah, what do you think?
Oh, I completely agree with everything Chanel said in terms of my lived experience growing up in an immigrant family. You know, when the Atlanta murders happened, a couple of days later, I called my mom to talk about it. And she said, "Oh my God, the news is so scary. Don't write about it." And I was instantly thrown back to how, as a family, we did not talk about really scary racism. And in the moment, I knew exactly why my mom was saying this to me. She's saying this to protect me. She doesn't want me to make myself a target by being outspoken. And I would never blame my parents for that feeling and that motivation, you know. But I basically just had to move the conversation along because I had already written about it. I had already written a big, long newsletter where I had explored my anger around racist stereotypes of Asian women. And the way that I explored the anger was by just laying out the facts in terms of, you know, we live with these stereotypes that are a legacy of racist immigration laws. So these stereotypes were created by policies, you know, because Canada wanted to stay a white man's country. You know, that is a direct quote. So there were laws in Canada, there were laws in the US, and kind of coming out of the same social environment and values. And I feel that I can speak about this stuff because I have a different level of power and privilege than what my parents had. And so I will never blame my parents for not being able to talk about racism in our home. And in a way we do now, you know, we just didn't do it when I was a kid.
I'm going to throw this to you, Lainey, because here's what I find a very interesting snapshot of this panel. We are all children of immigrants. And I feel like the price for our parents that you were talking about, Chanel, the price that they pay to come here, and they just are very happy to be here. And that was always the sentiment that I was raised with as well, which is you're just thankful and you're grateful you're here and you just kind of swallow the racism. But I also feel that looking at this panel, it also comes with the territory, at least for me as the firstborn of the family, that you were also raised with a fighting spirit, because I don't know about you guys, but I was my parents' translator. I am a native English speaker. Being born here, you have one foot in each world. You could see and understand the way that non-BIPOC people were treating your parents because you were the translator, and you also developed this thick skin to fight for the underdog, to be like, yo, you can't talk about my parents like that. And I feel like this panel is, we're all bubbling with this is who we also were raised with, is the duality of kind of keeping your head quiet, but also, wait a second, being a fighter at the same time.
Yeah, it's actually quite complicated. On the one hand, you are, for sure, you take it upon yourself to perhaps be your parents' defender. But on the other hand, I don't think that we, or I'll speak for me, I can deny the conditioning that white supremacy and the effect it has on a child of immigrants. I mean, when you're surrounded by whiteness, and in many cases you're going to school and you're growing up only around white people, there is also an accompanying sense of shame. Steven Yeun, who was nominated for an Oscar for the film Minari, just talked about this in an interview where he talked about growing up in America, and there was a time, and he has to reckon with his past shame, where he was thinking about his parents. Why don't we eat the kind of food my friends are eating? Why don't we have the kind of experiences my friends are experiencing? He meant like American food, American experiences. And I had the same thing, when I was 5, 6, 7, looking around at the white kids, wanting that kind of food, wanting that kind of life. My mother kind of pushed that out of me because I have a strong Chinese mom. But when you're a child of immigrants living in these lands, you do have that push-pull where you want to defend your culture and your parents, but also you're pushing back against your own sense of isolation and otherness. And it's a very complicated thing to work through. I wonder if, everybody else here has had an experience with that in the same way.
1,000%.
Yeah, and these
I
are
think
the
you're talking
complicated.
about cultural identity, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But I also think that,
identity.
we need to, absolutely, and Lainey, as you say, it's so complicated, but we need to have, I think, compassion and curiosity for ourselves when we look back on the things that we've done and said to assimilate. And we need to outwardly shine that compassion and curiosity as well for others, so that I think we can bring people up and along in the conversation, because I actually think that while systemic racism is not changing fast enough, it just is not. But interpersonal racism and the way we talk about things, and Chanel, you talked about the language, I feel like that is coming a long way. I feel very hopeful about that. And so I believe that if we can, think positively, not to be too Pollyanna-ish, but if we can,
No, that's good. The hope
have that
is
compassion
good.
for ourselves, we can have it out there in the world too.
I
Yeah, I
like
love
that.
that,
I
'cause
think
I
that we
feel
should leave
too-
that on that note. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I feel too like our generation is just inherently different than our parents, because growing up here, you do have a certain sense of equality. Like, call me crazy, but I have that and my parents don't. So I think it is up to us to carry forward those positive vibes and be really proud of who we are, so that other people can embrace it too.
Well, the point is to keep having these conversations. What a great opportunity we have on our show to do so, and we will continue.